Pick up next. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. No problem hearing me. Usually don't even need a mic. I don't want to get any feedback here. So today, I'm excited to present to you Mahmoud, who has graciously agreed to talk to all of us today. And he's a Kenwood resident as well as Professor Emeritus at McAllister College. And so today we're going to talk about his book, Haiti, The Hidden Truth. And I'm going to let him go ahead and do that. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, my dear, for that. I don't like long introductions. Thank you, Brandy, for that. I'd rather surprise than disappoint our audience. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss something that's been a part of my life since I was the 10th grader. Now, I'm not, that's when Haiti became a part of my life. Never been to Haiti. Had more than enough chances to go there. Had a minister friend who had 2 or 3 churches there, and he would always invite me to come. He's such a nice man, I didn't want to disappoint him because I had conflicts with that, the role of the church and NGOs and all of those people who are supposed to be helping Haiti. I had some criticism of the way they do that. So I've never been to Haiti, but it's been a part of my thinking for most of my life. One of my nephews is married to a Haitian. I've met, I don't know how many Haitian students. I've counted Haitians among my friends. And it leads to my biases. I think we all have one. It took me a long time to get to this point in talking to people, is to let them know who you are, really are. And it took a while to do this, admitting your biases. I'm a biased person, and I'm in favor of some people more than others. I'm in favor of the lowest, the least, and the lost, wherever they are. That's a position, that's a principal position. For people who've been robbed, oppressed, and degraded by whomever. I don't care about systems. Is that, what do you people say? Well, that's communist, and that's capitalist. That's not the deal. It's whether the system mistreats human beings deliberately. I'm opposed to that, and so that's a bias right there. It colors everything I say. You know that. I also am a champion of youth. When I was young, I was serving youth. That's most of my conscious life has been about serving young people, even when I was 16. And I've functioned primarily as, if you want to stretch the word, as some kind of educator. Some kind of activist, or even though I don't like that term, because so much, but I know what people mean. I've spent most of my life on the side of people, and I'm from among those peoples who have been abused by power. It's simple as that. It's all about power. It's not Democrat, Republican. Not with me. this side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle. The question is, what is the deed? The deed is what matters. And so I condemn the deed, no matter who's doing the wrong. They could look like me. They could look like Idi Amin. I'm opposed to them. Very clear on that. This is a human question. I also have an art sensibility that makes me biased. I think in the generality, women and girls make better human beings than men and boys. And I'm not just saying that to you because you're mostly women. That's true. Anybody who knows me knows that. And it's not just because the major influence of my values was a grandmother who was the first generation out of slavery and who started me on this trip that I'm into now. She taught me how to read. I'm like many black children who are first generation free black people after the Civil War. It's one of the greatest stories never told. It was those people who were slaves who learned to read in spite of the world. It was an illegal right to learn to read and write. I always remind people Frederick Douglass never spent a day in school in his life except to go to Western Reserve University the first time he went out of school as dressed a graduating class. That's what, and I think, with all due respect to Tom Brokaw, I think the people, those 4 million people who came out of slavery in 1865 are the greatest generation ever. That's what I think. Not what you think, not what black people think. I don't think for black people, and any of my students know that. You know, it's a position. I'm dare to say, I try to be a moral human being. I'm supposed to be that. I know that you're an American. You're supposed to be amoral. There's some things to me are just definitively wrong. And I'll go against anybody of any color, so-called race, which is utter nonsense to me, not to everybody else. I think it's the greatest hope ever perpetrated against humankind. There's a lot to do with this. I think the idea that we think we belong to distinct, discrete, never-changing races is complicated nonsense. And people have made it so. Science should help us out now. That's who created race. This is a kind of introduction to what I want to say, and I won't spend a lot of time. But I want you to know where I'm coming from. So you say that guy, oh, he's a communist, he's a this and that and the other, and this is just terrible. I'm just me. It's the way I think. And I'm not bound to any ideology, but I'm bound to certain ideas about freedom, justice, and respect for human beings. Because they're human beings. No, you don't need to qualify that. That's my stance. Okay, here we go. Thank you for those of you who come out to hear an opposite point of view on Haiti. I need not bore you with the statistics and what Haiti is. Haiti is the worst set of circumstances any human beings ever created for themselves, I guess. You know, we know it's a land of disaster, a land of disease, a land of death. a land of political corruption, tom-tom, maku, thugs running the streets, beating up people. It was a land of voodoo. I don't know who made that up. The name is Verdun. It's a god of certain African people. It's a religion. And I define religion as anything to which human beings owe their highest loyalty. That's what I think religion is. That's why I think white supremacy is a secular religion, like communism. It's a secular religion. So the thing to which you owe your highest loyalty above everything else. That's my assessment. The Haitian story, here's the point. I don't want to take up all the time. That's another thing. Brandy, I guess, oh, she's not here. Well, why don't somebody time? Brandy, give me 20 minutes.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I know how time is. Time. Time is a neutral variable. You can make anything you want out of time. Why do the Greeks have 8 days? And the Yoruba people of West Africa have 10 days in a week. Because you can do what you want with it. It's human creation. Time. So Haiti is the breadbasket case of the world. All the sense of the flesh you can find there in abundance. I mean, it's just, and they're really bad people. And tied to this voodoo, which is a corruption, that's the colonial oppressor's definition of Verdun. I can say this about these religions that out of Africa, is that Latin America is above America in this sense that religion, African religions thrive in many parts of Latin America. Santiago thrives in communist Cuba. It was supposed to be based on atheism. Why did it look the other way? Castro, never. It thrives. The same thing in Brazil. Challenges Catholicism. And they recognize that Africans have religion. And let me say this, and I'll get off the religious kick because I don't want to insult anybody. And I've already done that, I guess, but I'm too late. But I was once talking to an African. I went to school a little bit in Ghana, and I got to know the curator of the museum. And one thing led to another. God, they call God Oyame, these people. And I just wanted to know, because I am American, black though I am, I'm a lot like white Americans. I know that this is one of these things in my head. Well, who is Oyame? Where did he come from? When? Well, he said, he didn't come. Well, you got to come, The religion, what's the dispensation? Who brought it? He said, nobody brought it. How can you have a religion, without the prophet and the dispensation? The Moses, the Jesus, Muhammad, right? Zoroaster, right? Well, he said, we don't have that kind of religion, because religion is timeless. Oyame has always been here. He didn't come. He's always been here. Where? Everywhere. Where is he? In the tree? Yeah. What is it? Water? In the earth? In the wind? In the rain? In the breeze? That's who God is. Nobody brought us any dispensation. That's a tough one. That certainly was a tough one for me. Because I was baptized, yes, as an Episcopalian. And I was a nominal Christian I guess until the Vietnam War is when it really began to question stuff like my faith. I carry a Muslim name, but I'm not a member of Islam. I have many Islamic friends. That's a name that belonged to a great historian who lived in Timbuktu. And I studied him a little bit. It's a family of scholars. Mahmoud El-Kati was the last of a string of great scholars who wrote the history of West Africa in Arabic. That's why we know where Timbuktu was. That's why we know that's probably the most famous word in any language, is Timbuktu. And it still stands at the bend of the Niger River right now. It's a ghost town. Now, it once was a thriving city, trading with people above the Sahara, including some of the people who now call Spanish, and that's who put the word in our vocabulary, the Iberian people who knew Africans before the slave trade, were trading with them when it was a little minor gang. Why I talk this way is because this did come from a man who was a scholar in Egypt. It is why I talk the way I talk. Said everything is related to everything. Everything has a place, and yet everything is related to everything. And there are no free lunches on this earth. I think like that. That one thing is related to another. You know, I'm related to you in some sense in spite of the doctrine of white supremacy, which I've been arguing against most of my conscious life. Anybody who's been around me knows that. I think that race is a myth. Now, I don't mean this little play thing, but the children, that's not the kind of myth I'm talking about. Human beings are myth-making creatures. Black people make myths. Everybody makes myths, but there's never been a myth like this, as destructive as this idea of race and the practice of racism, ISM, from a practice that was created within the last 400 or 500 years. There were no people on this earth until Christopher Columbus got lost. Yeah, I said that. It makes a lot of people mad. Don't care. Well, he said he was lost by calling these people, what? Indians. Yeah. Indians live in India. All human beings get their name from land and language, not skin color. I think some of you know that. See, a lot of people know stuff and don't want to acknowledge that they know it because they mess up the script. You know, I know that many people who will call themselves white or whatever know exactly what I'm talking about. Some don't, I'm not sure. Because some people really believe in the myth, you know, like the people who went to the Capitol in January. Actually, I don't think they're kidding. That's real. They believe that. And that's what race does. You see, not with your eyes, but with your beliefs, and you impose your beliefs over everything. Why Haiti is such a terrible place? Because people want that to be so. It is poverty there. There is good political corruption. You know, there are bad guys, Tom Maku, and so forth. Yeah. But there's something else. Life is too, there's nothing that simple. Human beings are not that way. There's no such thing as a simple human being. You can be simple-minded, I agree, like me sometimes. But you're not simple. That's a contradiction in terms. And Haitians are not simple. very bright people come from Haiti. And the trouble that Haiti's in, is it is something that people ought to be applauding all over the world for the achievement of Haitians is the simple and overriding fact that they're the first people in recorded history that we know of in which a slave society overthrew their masters. There's nothing to compare to it. And it inspired people all over the world at one time. It inspired Simon Bolivar, who was often seen as the liberator of Latin America. He met with Haitians. He talked to Haitians, the leaders of the Haitian Revolution, the great triumvirate of Toussaint Louverture, Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe. These are the greatest military leaders ever. You said, how could you say that? Well, they just happened to defeat the most powerful army of its time. Ran them out of Haiti twice with their tails between their legs. The most powerful white, I don't believe that nonsense, but I'm saying, state, Napoleon Bonaparte. They drained the economy of the French. The most powerful state had Europe on its knees around the 18, up until the German coalition in Belgium, where he was defeated. He was defeated, that's sort in 1815. Haiti had done that a decade earlier. That's what weakened Napoleon. It's not, the Europeans aren't the first people to defeat Napoleon. It was Africans. The band of little ragtag Igbos and Hausas and Yorubas and Fry. They organized something people are not supposed to do if you're black. They were unified. They were different peoples in Africa. That's what it didn't belong to any Negro race. That's nonsense. Toussaint Louverture was an Ashanti, people who identify with in Ghana. Very bright people. He was Jacques Dessalines was a Yoruba who lives in the northern part of Nigeria. Another thing, what makes me say people know what I know and they won't say anything about it. I mean, I'm talking to intellectuals now. Right? People at University of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Harvard, they know this stuff better than I do. And I've spent most of my life as an adult in academia around these people. They know 10 times more than I do. That's what I'm talking about. Why isn't that more generally known? Why isn't that true? I'm not making that stuff up. There was a Toussaint Louverture. There was a Jacques Dessalines. And they kicked France out of Haiti twice and liberated the island from the French, from the English and the other parties, the Spanish. When they gained their freedom, they gave Haiti its original name of the Tano people, not Indians, Tano people, not Indians, they didn't speak Indian. And they were eliminated shortly after the first one was Hispaniola, the Spanish started the genocidal thing, and the French got it for a while. And the same thing took place. There may be a handful of descendants of Tiano people in Haiti. It's the blackest of the islands. General Bishop Bartholomew, caring, sensitive Catholic, this is why you can't go for the race stuff. I can't, if he's white, I'm supposed to say he's no good. No. This man, he did a good and a bad thing at the same time. He felt for the Native American people. And because of the Spanish contact with Africans, when we were trading with one another on a minor scale and slave level, on a very minor scale, it was he trying to help the Native Americans who influenced the leaders of France to import more Negroes. Some of you know more about this than others. The Negro is not, what is that? That's a harmless adjective in the Spanish language. I can't speak Spanish that well. I don't know whether I took Spanish or Spanish took me, but you know, it's and I'm not a linguist and I don't know a lot of stuff. I'm good in two languages, broken English and profanity. I'm really good at that. Yeah. But Bishop Bartholomew pleaded to bring because he felt sorry for the Native Americans by disease and genocide and so forth. And they already had a relationship with African before the discovery of America. There's a Negro factory, a Negro house in Ghana called El Mina. That's Portuguese for something like mine, M-I-N-E. Was built in 1482. Again, Chris didn't show up until 1492. Christopher Columbus. The big, massive thing. You should see these slave factories. Like a small community almost, built strong. There are 26 of them in Ghana alone. They're all up and down the coast of Africa from Mauritania to Angola. These are slave factories where black people were kept. And Spanish people built most of them, but I'm sorry to say this, Christiansborg, which is another castle in Ghana, was built by the Danes. And I hate to say that about the Danes because I'm biased about it. I like Danes. They're different from other Europeans. But they weren't in it. The Danes were there. They built this much, not the scale of El Mina, but the buildings are very well structured and artistically impressive. And I just hated to find out that the Danes, oh, you were in it too. Yeah, well, let me tell you that everybody was in it. There were leaders, the 5 leading nations, which is responsible for the Atlantic slave trade, begins with the Portuguese, so the oldest white, I'm using white for convenience. I don't believe that. I don't believe there are any white people. Dare any human being, I'm talking about human being, to prove to me that you're white. Anybody. I'd like for you to do that, I don't think you can. That's a question that's answerable. I'm just trying to answer answerable questions. It's not something that only I know, and I know very little, and I know that I know very little. Like Voltaire said, all that I know is that I know nothing, and I'm not sure of that. That's just a fact. Haiti deserves admiration and respect from the human family. It liberated some people from oppression and inspired people throughout Latin America under Simon Bolivar. That's why Latin America, the whole of the 19th century, it took the whole century. And Brazil was the last slave state in 1888 to free its slaves. Same year that Russia freed its serf, and which is interesting. So Haiti needs to be dealt with fairly by historians and all of these other people because it is a magnificent story. I think it's the greatest story never told. It's an inspiration story. The great story of slaves overthrowing their masters. Never happened. Another tidbit. Denmark Vesey was inspired by the Haitian Revolution. Who was Denmark Vesey? You know, if we had a real history of America, we would know who Denmark Vesey was. He was the organizer of the largest slave conspiracy ever in 1822 in Charleston, South Carolina, at the then young and growing Mother Emanuel African American Episcopal Church, where those 9 people were murdered by this agent, Kenwood, this young man, 21 years old. Sat down, prayed with them, and got up and murdered them. 9 people. That's greater than the Boston Massacre. Only 5 people were killed in the Boston Massacre. Isn't that interesting? That's a massacre. And walked out of the building. He is a victim of the doctrine of white supremacy. Black people are victims, Native people are victims, there's no question about it. There's victimization of white people who are not allowed by that doctrine to be fully fleshed human beings any more than blacks. As long as that you can't blame him, really. He did the act, the deed. How did you come by that? But Denmark Vesey was a name that you had to whisper on the slave plantation because of his conspiracy was greater than the one we may know, the Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia in 1831. But he was suspected of being a Haitian. He's still arguing over whether or not. There were a time he wouldn't let Haitians in New Orleans when the revolution took place and the masses came to New Orleans and helped create the Creole Society. So I'm going to say over and over again that educated people, learned people, I have a different sense of what I call it. I think the Greeks were right. You say, leading oneself out of ignorance continuously. You never stop learning with a PhD. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to mean. Now the Greeks said it, so I know that's right. Right. Greeks were right about everything. You know, it's leading yourself out of ignorance continuously. Not the other way around. We are misleaders away from truth, away from knowledge, away from stuff right in front of you. And you can't accept it because the belief says you cannot accept African people, for instance, as a part of American history. We've been a part of American history longer than 80% of people who call themselves white. I don't believe that the average white family can date back as far as my family. I don't believe it. My family has been in the legitimate war, I'm talking about, the ones not, you don't count all the wars against the Native Americans. But we missed the Revolutionary War, but we've been in every one of them since the War of 1812. Longer than most people who all they have to say is white and claim the history and nonsense like that. I'll tell you a little story on this sidelight about race. See, when you're not talking about race, you're talking about race. Still, my favorite quarterback, Drew Brees. If you're not a football fan, you might not know who he is, but he's the best. He's better than these tall guys. Because I don't know how he does that in a big man's game. Complete passes, he's a laser. And he was my favorite until, the racial reckoning emerged and the question about black people and the flag came up, and he pointed out that he had to differ with his teammates because my uncle and my father were in World War II. I'm saying, wow. I like to sit down and talk to Breeze. And he's my favorite quarterback, I liked him. When he said that, my stock, his stock as a human being went way, way down. Does he know he's around all these black guys playing, that black people fighting wars? He didn't know that. You know, even though we know that, we don't know that. Because your beliefs won't allow you to say Crispus Attucks. How many of you know that name? Thank you, ma'am. And I'm sure you're a well-educated lady. I know that. But very few people, well-educated people. Now, John Adams said this. I didn't say this. On March 5th, 1770, the foundations of American freedom was laid by the death of that tall, woolly-haired Negro, knees unusually close together. The first to defy and the first to die for the cause of American freedom. I didn't say that. I didn't write that. They said that at the time. The nation's first martyr is what they call a Negro. Who knows that? Well, they know at Harvard, they know at Princeton, they know at the University of Minnesota, but the guy who you meet on the bus or walking down the street may work with him, may even like him as a person. He doesn't know that. Who's responsible for that? I think the leadership of America generally, so which is the Democrat and Republican, they both have had their turn. You know, the black people are always, everything's related to everything. Black people are solidly Democratic. I heard a black man say, I was born a Democrat and I'm going to die a Democrat. That's kind of ignorant. What are you talking about? You know, in my grandfather's day, a black Democrat was as scarce as a buffalo. Oh, Democrat. The Democratic Party was founded by slave owners. Jefferson and his buddy, Madison. They were founded. The Republican Party historically were the progressives. When they organized in 1854 and included people who were against slavery, against the institution of slavery. Abraham Lincoln was against the extinction of slavery. He was not an abolitionist. But the myth is that he's the father of black people's freedom. That's terrible. That simply is not true. The facts say that. I didn't make that up. Think about that. Abraham Lincoln. Nice guy, I think. But at the root of his thing, he wasn't really for black people. He made some magnificent statements. I think he's, of all the presidents, he was probably the most tested and I think the brightest president. He was forced to think on his feet. And he did that well. You know, but during one of the debates when Douglas accused him of social integration, I mean, everything what is related to everything. Douglas, Stephen Douglas, the great debates, this is one of the 7 debates, greatest debates in American history, accused him of being for social integration. And his response was, I have not now, nor have I ever been, of making voters, jurors of, Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold public office. And I will say, in addition to this, I believe that there's a physical distinction between the two races, which forbids the two from living together in terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as we cannot so live, I, as much as any other white man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. He's in between. He says some marvelous things. There's no question about it. in the name of freedom. But at bottom, when Frederick Douglass was invited to the first statue by ex-slaves built for Lincoln, he let them know that in the fullest sense of the man, he's a great man who's gone to that silent continent of eternity. But I must tell you that in the fullest meaning, the fullest sense of the word, Abraham Lincoln was not our man nor our model. Not our man nor our model. In his habits, in his association, in his prejudices, he was American as any other white man, you know. I mean, racism has to be confronted if this country is to grow up. Now, it's been said, what you heard that before. I think black people, you know, I'm one of these black people, and I thought we were on the way during the 1960s. I think we had raised white supremacy on the run. We had a few white people putting up signs in their windows saying racism must go. No, they said white racism. You know, that was another time. You don't need to say white racism. You don't say anything but what Jimmy Baldwin has said. When I say racism, I mean white supremacy, which is a doctrine like communism. And this country was founded on that principle, along with all the other things. The country, the nature of America is self-contradictory. It is for freedom. How can you prove that? Well, all the numbers of people who come here, and it's like God, heaven. I agree with them. The immigration story is a great story. See, I don't have any problem with that. With the Statue of Liberty and Emma Lazarus' poem, he was a Marxist. How can you do with that? People don't know thinking, people don't want to hear that. It was extracted from her poem and put on the Statue of Liberty at the base of it after it's been set up. The original idea of a Statue of Liberty came from French abolitionists. It was saluting Lincoln and the freedom of slaves. That's why that chain is down there. They don't explain that on the feet of Lady Liberty. It was a gesture from France, America's first ally. That we want to salute Lincoln and the slaves and the freedom. And they twisted that was in 1865. By 1886, they had changed the whole, that's when they finished the Statue of Liberty, changed the whole meaning of it and made it a gesture of refuge for immigrants. That's not the original reason. But it's a great story. African Americans who live in what we call the United States are not immigrants any more than Native Americans are immigrants. You know what an immigrant is. You leave citizenship for one country for another, and that's it. There's no big thing. But black people were here before George Washington was born, before the Constitution was written, when most white people didn't know where America was in the world. We were building America's wealth. People don't like to hear that. What do you think slavery was about? What do you think that was? Some kind of ingathering among white and black people at a picnic or something? No, that's what I mean. So I said enough already about Haiti. Why Haiti? And I want to refer you to people who've gone much farther than I in Haiti. A good friend of mine, Randall Robinson, has wrote a book called Unbroken Agony, describing Haiti. He knows a lot, much more than I do about it, and written vast tracts. He worked for Haiti. He went on a starvation situation. He thought he was going to die when there was no help. One of these disasters that often comes to Haiti, he was trying to get help. He was taken off of, people had to save him who loved him because he was trying to get the attention of the world. What's happening? The organizations that come over to help never seem to be able to help Haitians. A lot of this stuff with these NGOs, non-governmental agencies, is nothing but a hustle. I've been around some of them. It's hustle. That's why, lots of money. People make lots of money. That's just the fact. Haiti is one of the great sources of inspiration for humankind, not just black people. And that's what you ought to know. You don't know the Haitians defeated Napoleon. And as you see, his resources he drained the resources of France. And he was forced to give Jefferson Louisiana Territory on the cheap for $15 million. That's right. There are records arguing in the Congress, of people saying, had it not been for these little ragtag Africans in Haiti, we would not have been able to purchase the Louisiana Territory, which made America twice the size that it was. As I think you told me, it's this twist of fate that we're not speaking French. Because Napoleon was about it all, about capturing other white people. You know what I say when I say white? I mean, white is a metaphor to me for power. That's all. That's what it really means. It kind of means Machiavellian definition of stuff. That's what it means to me. Stokely Carmichael had the perfect antidote when he said all that white people have, that black people need, is power. That's all. It wouldn't be this way if power was shared. And Americans went crazy, particularly the liberals, our friends. That's when they began to withdraw. Around that, the essential question is that slaves had no power, masters have no longer, their descendants had no power. All black people had was conscience. And we want to exchange some powerless conscience for some conscienceless power. Let's have that deal. This is what, so Haiti to me is something that needs to be studied and understood and appreciation for its own right. I mean, people who want to be fair and try to understand that America is a part of an international conspiracy against Haiti. All the Western world. Do you know what that means? Dr. Du Bois called it unforgivable blackness. A handful of ragtag Africans beat the most powerful army in the world. That's what that's about. It's an embarrassment to the doctrine of white supremacy. When it was flexing its muscle all over the world, even parts of China. That's what happened. That's why Haiti is isolated. That's why all the Western world ganged up, blockaded for years, put in these puppets for the government on people, corrupt people, and made Papa Doc and his son, Baby Doc, and those things. It started in the 1850s when Haiti became stagnated. And Haiti, the last time they were occupied, U.S. Marines, was in 1934. That's recent. That's who ran Haiti, the United States military. And the great story, the tragedy of the young priest, Dr. The story in the election of 1990, that the first time in the history of Haiti you had a democratic election. And this young voice, who doesn't come to me now,
Aristide,
yeah. Aristide, thank you. Perfectly good. And his African-American wife. He might have held that against him too. But he had people, he got rid of these categories of caste. There's castes, It's just not white and black. Haiti had a caste system under the whites on the top, and you had somebody called a franchise, depending on your kind of blood, your so-called white and black blood. Think about this. I know that everybody in this room knows that blood flows in human veins. Thank you. And all of it's red. There's no white blood or black blood. Dr. Charles Drew proved that during World War II. Blood comes in types. It doesn't belong to white people and so forth. None of my children, I have 3 children, have my blood type, and that's common. Women, for some reason or other, can translate types. I'm B positive. Son is O, and another one is something else. In a blood sense, I may be more akin to people who think they're white than I am to my own family, because there's a lot of, I'm B positive. You may be B positive.
I want to know who did the work.
What context is wrong?
Who did the work?
Work on what? On what?
Of building, of establishing, of making churches, schools, educating the children. Who did that?
Well, Haitians tried to do some of it, but it was largely outsiders, which determined that. I know what you're saying, people outside, but Haiti had not, since the revolution was oppressed, it has never been in charge of its own destiny.
But it has to educate.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody has to do it.
Well, what are you saying? I'm critiquing it in a very good...
I'm saying get off that chair and get up and teach us.
Get off that chair and get up and teach you.
And get up and teach us something about religion, about origin.
Oh, is that a question directed to me personally, that I should get up and go teach?
Yes.
I've been doing that most of my life. That's what I've been doing. I didn't choose to be in the movement, it chose me. And my grandmother.
And I'm listening.
Yeah, well, what you're saying is I've talked to everybody in the American community, not just black people. I've been all over the country in different schools. I've been in white on white schools, where I was the only black person in town. There are black people like me all over America who've done that.
That's funny. You were talking and I wasn't even conscious of what color you were.
Asking a question.
Well, that's good. I could discuss that a little further, but that's all right. I mean, if people say, I don't see color, I want you to see color. Because it's in the world, it's real. You don't know how I look? Come on. I mean, black people don't even have to go outside of there if you're talking about race to talk about color, because we are a multicolored people. The black people in the United States, like the people in Latin America, are byproducts of 3 geographic populations. That's what you call it. That's what race really is. It's geography. And the racial makeup of the New World are indigenous people, European people, and African people. That's who we are. Black people didn't become black, brown, and beige by artificial insemination. I'm saying this. It was mass rape on the part that started on the west coast of Africa. Why, don't you see black people are dark people like me? And my cousin Theodore is about 5 shades lighter than me. We're both black. That's crazy. That's the ideology of white supremacy. Make you nut. It's time to get out of town, I think. But does anybody have any questions? Thank you for that, but I would have kept talking. The one thing you should not allow just to talk as a preacher and a historian, because they'll go on. So anybody have a question or a comment about what I said or didn't say? You said, who did the work, you know?
You know,
thought you-
I want to say I agree with an awful lot of what you said about people and how you can't divide them into classes and races and creeds and whatnot. I have felt that more and more the older I've gotten.
Yeah, yeah. These are artificial.
Yeah,
A lot of this stuff is created by structures, by power structures. America's not unique. Look, for instance, when the Communist Revolution in 1917 prevailed, the Bolsheviks, they established a new system, period. No more Tsarism. The Russian Revolution was a complete revolution because it brought into being a system that was different from the system that preceded them, a whole new system. You got, that the American Revolution had made a contribution to that, of, where you had to be kin to somebody to be somebody. A revolutionary act on the part of America is to allow citizens to be Mr., Mrs., and Miss. No king. There were people vying for Connecticut to be a Presbyterian state or whatever. Yeah, because religion was what divided Europeans, mostly. The Catholic and Protestants had fought one another from the Dark Ages up until modernity. People know this. Most wars historically in Europe was about religion, not race, until the Irish came along. Yeah, well, the Irish people know. See, I said I favor the lowest, least, and the lost. Little short story. I was this is a number of years ago, at a community center in a community called Sabathani Community Center, very important in helping people. This particular time or year, whenever it was, I was invited to be one of the speakers to talk to some Irish people who were coming through the country, getting some images and definitions of what America was, and I was to come and talk about African Americans as a segment of the American population. And there are about 35 Irishmen. Now, again, I told you, see, because it colors everything I say. But I was on the side of Bernadette Devlin. I met her. Bernadette Devlin, a name fake, radical Irish woman who taught me something about slavery. When she let me know that Irish had been enslaved by the English longer than black people had been enslaved by the Englishmen. It was 700 years. I was just a brief 400. She said, let me tell you what, that's before race emerged and took over. And the Irish are the first people in Europe to be defined as a race, the Irish race, because they were already down. And any Irishman who knows his history, and I know enough Irishmen to know this, who would agree with me, who remembers, they don't directly remember when they were in Boston, no Irish need apply for this job or any other job for that. Someplace no Irish, not dogs are allowed. That's racism. But these are white people. Albert Einstein, give an unsuspecting place to say this, that a voice, because he's such a great scientist, and he gave me the best definition of history that I have been able to top. He said the distinction that we make between the past, the present, and the future is a stubborn illusion. You can't do that. You can't literally separate the past from the present. And he's right. You can't literally do that. That's like living outside your skin. How can you do that? Another guy named the great novelist from Mississippi, Faulkner. He said it. The past never really passes. I think that's true, even though he was a white supremacist to the bone. See, I don't have anybody. If that's a true statement, I don't care where it comes from. And I know I wouldn't like Faulkner. If I met him, I wouldn't want to have tea with him, you know. But I agree with that because he said it. It makes sense to me. Yes.
How can we, this is a terrible way to say it, but how can we help people? How can we empower the people or their?
Well, that's the same old
Yeah.
yeah.
How can we help? How can we
Hurricanes,
empower?
there's a lot of suffering there.
Yeah,
What's to
well,
be
you
done?
do.
Money, money.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. But there are genuine, let me make the scripture clear, there are people that I know who going to Haiti are sincere and genuine, you know. But a lot of it is playing games. It's around money. And it's about building reputations as humanitarians and these NGOs people. It's that too. There are good people in Haiti. We're not talking about them. You know. Yeah, well, we want to talk about the black people, how they're, you know, they're hungry and they're lazy and they can't self-govern and just power. All the sins of the flesh belong to black people in Haiti. No, like everything, there are hustlers and everything. The Reconstruction period is one of the greatest periods in African American history, but there were also crooks involved in Reconstructions who came. That's where the term, you know, carpetbagger came from, because the Northerners came south to help make the transformation from slavery to freedom, and many of them came there to hustle, to get rich, and many of them did. They had nothing but a carpetbag. That's all their worldly possessions. All right. Well, look, I want to thank you very much for listening to me. Appreciate you. Thank you.